Page 106, Chapter 21. Winnie pulled her little rocking chair up to her bedroom window and sat down. The rocking chair had been given to her when she was very small, but she still squeezed into it sometimes when no one was looking, because the rocking made her almost remember something pleasant, something soothing, that would never quite come up to the surface of her mind, and tonight she wanted to be soothed. The constable had brought her home. They had seized her at once, flinging the gate open and swooping down on her, her mother weeping, her father speechless, hugging her to him, her grandmother babbling with excitement. There was a painful pause when the constable told them she had gone away of her own free will, but it only lasted for a moment. They would not believe it, and her grandmother said, "It was the elves. We heard them. They must have bewitched her." And so they had borne her into their house, and after she had taken the bath they insisted upon, they fed and petted her and refused, with little laughs and murmurs, to accept her answers to their questions. She had gone away with the Tucks because, well, she just wanted to. The Tucks had been very kind to her, had given her flapjacks, taken her fishing. The Tucks were good and gentle people. All this would have been swept away in any case, however, this good impression of her friends, which she was trying to create, when she told them what had happened to the man in the yellow suit. Had they really given him the wood in exchange for finding her? They had. Well, perhaps he wouldn't want it now. May had hit him with a shotgun. He was very sick. They received this news with mingled hope and horror, and her father said, "I suppose the wood will be ours again, if that man should. That is, if he doesn't." "You mean if he dies?" Winnie had said flatly, and they had sat back, shocked. Soon after, they put her to bed with many kisses, but they peered at her anxiously over their shoulders as they tiptoed out of her bedroom, as if they sensed that she was different now from what she had been before, as if some part of her had slipped away. Well, thought Winnie, crossing her arms on the windowsill, she was different. Things had happened to her that were hers alone and had nothing to do with them. It was the first time, and no amount of telling about it could help them understand or share what she felt. It was satisfying and lonely, both at once. She rocked, gazing out at the twilight, and the soothing feeling came reliably into her bones. That feeling, it tied her to them, to her mother, her father, her grandmother, with strong threads too ancient and precious to be broken. But there were new threads now, tugging and insistent, which tied her just as firmly to the Tucks. Winnie watched the sky slide into blackness over the wood outside her window. There was not the least hint of a breeze to soften the heavy August night. And then, over the treetops on the faraway horizon, there was a flash of white, heat lightning. Again and again it throbbed, without a sound. It was like pain, she thought, and suddenly she longed for a thunderstorm. She cradled her head in her arms and closed her eyes. At once the image of the man in the yellow suit rose up. She could see him again, sprawled motionless on the sun-blanched grass. "He can't die," she whispered. "Think of May. He mustn't." And then she considered his plans for the water in the spring, and Tuck's voice saying, "They'd all come running like pigs to slops." And she found herself thinking, if it's true about the spring, then he has to die. He must. And that's why she did it. Then she heard hoofbeats on the road below, a horse hurrying into the village, and not long after there were footsteps and a knocking on the door. Winnie crept out of her room and crouched in the shadows at the top of the stairs. It was the constable. She heard him saying, "So that's that, Mr. Foster. We can't press no kidnapping charges since your little girl claims there wasn't no kidnapping. But it don't matter now anyway. The doc just got back a few minutes ago. That feller, the one you sold your land to, he's dead. There was a pause and the murmur of other voices, then a match striking, the acrid smell of fresh cigar smoke. Yep, she got him a good one all right. He never even come to it. So it's an open and shut case, since I seen her do it. Eyewitness. No question about it. They'll hang her for sure. Winnie went back to her room and climbed into the bed. She lay in the dark, propped up the pillows, and stared at the lighter square of her window, at the heat lightning throbbing. It was like pain, she thought again, a dull pain on the fringes of the sky. May had killed the man in the yellow suit, and she had meant to kill him. Winnie had killed a wasp once, in fear and anger, just in time to spare herself of stinging. She had slammed at the wasp with a heavy book and killed it. And then, seeing its body broken, the thin wings stilled, she had wished it were alive again. She had wept for that wasp. Was May weeping now for the man in the yellow suit? In spite of her wish to spare the world, did she wish he were alive again? There was no way of knowing, but May had done what she thought she had to do. Winnie closed her eyes to shut out the silence, pulsing in the lightning. Now she would have to do something. She had no idea what, but something. May Tuck must not go to the gallows. Page 111, chapter 22. Next morning, Winnie went out to the fence directly after breakfast. It was the hottest day yet, so heavy that the slightest exertion brought on a flood of perspiration and exhaustion in the joints. 2 days before, they would have insisted that she stay indoors, but now this morning they were careful with her, a little gingerly, as if she were an egg. She had said, "I'm going outside now," and they said, "All right, but come in if it gets too hot, won't you, dear?" And she had answered yes. The earth, where it was worn bald under the gate, was cracked and hard as a rock, a lifeless tan color, and the road was an aisle of brilliant velvet dust. Winnie leaned against the fence, her hands gripping the warm metal of the bars, and thought about May behind another set of bars in the jailhouse. And then, lifting her head, she saw the toad. It was squatting where she had seen it first, across the road. "Hello," she said, very glad to see it. The toad did not so much flick a muscle or blink an eye. It looked dried out today, parched. "It's thirsty," said Winnie to herself. No wonder. On a day like this, she left the fence and went back into the cottage. "Granny, can I have some water in a dish? There's a toad out in front that looks as if he's just about to die of thirst." "A toad?" said her mother, wrinkling her nose in disgust. "Nasty things, toads." "Not this one," said Winnie. "This one is always out there, and I like him. Can I give him a drink of water?" "Toads don't drink water, Winifred. It wouldn't do him any good." "They don't drink water at all?" "No. They take it through their skins like a sponge when it rains." "But it hasn't rained forever," said Winnie, alarmed. "I could sprinkle some water on him, couldn't I? That would help, wouldn't it?" "Well, I suppose so," said the grandmother. "Where is he? In the yard?" "No," said Winnie. "He's across the road." "I'll come with you then. I don't want you leaving the yard alone." But then they came out to the fence, Winnie balancing a small bowl of water with enormous care. The toad was gone. "Well, he must be all right," said her grandmother, "if he could hop off." With mingled disappointment and relief, Winnie tipped the water onto the cracked earth at the gate. It was sucked in immediately, and the wet brown stain it left behind paled and vanished almost as quickly. "I never saw such heat in all my life," said Winnie's grandmother, dabbing uselessly at her neck with a handkerchief. Don't stay out here much longer. I won't, said Winnie, and was left alone once more. She sat down on the grass and sighed. May! What could she do to set May free? She closed her eyes again to the glaring light and watched a little dizzily as brilliant patterns of red and orange danced inside her eyelids. And then, miraculously, Jessie was there, crouching just on the other side of the fence. Winnie, he hissed. You sleeping? Oh, Jessie! Her eyes flew open and she reached through the fence to grasp his hand. I'm so glad to see you. What can we do? We have to get her out. Mal's got a plan, but I don't see how it can work, said Jessie, speaking quickly, his voice almost a whisper. He knows a lot about carpenting, he says. He says he can take Ma's window frame right straight out of the wall, bars and all, and she can climb through. We're going to try it tonight when it gets dark. Only trouble is that Constable keeps watching her every minute. He's so darn proud of having a prisoner in that new jail of his. We've been down to see her. She's all right, but even if she can climb through the window, he'll come after her soon he sees she's gone. Seems to me he'll notice right off. That don't give us much time to get away, but we got to try it. There ain't no other way. Anyhow, I come to say goodbye. We won't be able to come back here for a long, long time, Winnie, if we get away. I mean, they'll be looking for Ma. Winnie, listen. I won't see you again, not for ages. Look now, here's a bottle of water from the spring. You keep it. And then, no matter where you are, when you're 17, Winnie, you can drink it and then come find us. We'll leave directions somehow. Winnie, please say you will. He pressed the little bottle into her hands, and Winnie took it, closing her fingers over it. Jessie, wait, she whispered breathlessly. For all at once she had the answer. I can help. When your mother climbs out the window, I'll climb in and take her place. I can wrap myself up in her blanket, and when the constable looks in, he won't be able to tell the difference. Not in the dark. I can hump up and look a lot bigger. Miles can even put the pillow back. That would give you time to get away. You have at least till morning. Jessie squinted at her, and then he said, Yep, you know it. It might work. It might just make the difference. But I don't know as Pa's going to want you taking any risk. I mean, what'll they say to you after, when they find out? I don't know, said Winnie, but it doesn't matter. Tell your father I want to help. I have to help. If it wasn't for me, there wouldn't have been any trouble in the first place. Tell him I have to. Well, all right. Can you get out after dark? Yes, said Winnie. Then at midnight, Winnie. I'll be waiting for you right here at midnight. Winifred, an anxious voice called from the cottage. Who's that you're talking to? Winnie stood up and turned to answer. It's just a boy, Granny. It'll be in a minute. When she turned around again, Jessie was gone. Winnie clutched the little bottle in her hands and tried to control the rising excitement that made her breath catch. At midnight, she would make a difference in the world. Page 116, chapter 23. It was the longest day, mindlessly hot, unspeakably hot, too hot to move or even think. The countryside, the village of Tree Gap, the wood, all lay defeated. Nothing stirred. The sun was a ponderous circle without edges, a roar without a sound, a blazing glare so thorough and remorseless that even in the Fosters' parlor, with curtains drawn, it seemed an actual presence. You could not shut it out. Winnie's mother and grandmother sat plaintive all afternoon in the parlor, fanning themselves and sipping lemonade, their hair unsettled and their knees loose. It was totally unlike them, this lapse from gentility, and it made them much more interesting. But Winnie didn't stay with them. Instead, she took her own brimming glass to her room and sat in her little rocker by the window. Once she had hidden Jessie's bottle in a bureau drawer, there was nothing to do but wait. In the hall outside her room, the grandfather's clock ticked deliberately, unimpressed with anyone's impatience. And Winnie found herself rocking to its rhythm, forward, back, tick, tock, tick, tock. She tried to read, but it was so quiet that she could not concentrate, and so she was glad when at last it was time for supper. It was something to do, though none of them could manage more than a nibble. But later, when Winnie went out again to the fence, she saw that the sky was changing. It was not so much clouding up as thickening somehow from every direction at once, the blank blue gone to haze. And then, as the sun sank reluctantly behind the treetops, the haze hardened to a brilliant brownish yellow. In the wood, the leaves turned underside up, giving the trees a silvery cast. The air was noticeably heavier. It pressed on Winnie's chest and made her breathing difficult. She turned and went back into the cottage. "It's going to rain, I think," she told the prostrate group in the parlor, and the news was received with little moans of gratitude. Everyone went to bed early, closing windows firmly on their way, for outside, though it was almost dark, shreds of the hard brown-yellow light lingered on the rims of things, and there was a wind beginning. Small gusts that rattled the fence gate and set the trees to rustling. The smell of rain hung sweet in the air. "What a week this has been," said Winnie's grandmother. "Well, thank the Lord it's almost over," and Winnie thought to herself, yes, it's almost over. There were 3 hours to wait before midnight, and nothing whatever to do. Winnie wandered restlessly about her room, sat in her rocker, lay on her bed, counted the ticks of the hall clock. Beneath her excitement, she was thick with guilt. For the second time in 3 short days, though they seemed many more than that, she was about to do something which she knew would be forbidden. She didn't have to ask. Winnie had her own strong sense of rightness. She knew that she could always say, afterwards, "Well, you never told me not to." But how silly that would be. Of course, it would never occur to them to include such a thing on their list of don'ts. She could hear them saying it and almost smiled. "Now, remember, Winifred, don't bite your fingernails, don't interrupt when someone else is speaking, and don't go down to the jailhouse at midnight to change places with prisoners." Still, it wasn't really funny. What would happen in the morning when the constable found her in the cell and had to bring her home for the second time? What would they say? Would they ever trust her again? Winnie squirmed, sitting in the rocker, and swallowed uncomfortably. Well, she would have to make them understand somehow without explaining. The hall clock chimed 11. Outside, the wind had stopped. Everything, it seemed, was waiting. Winnie lay down and closed her eyes, thinking of Tuck and May and Miles and Jessie. Her heart softened. They needed her to take care of them. For in the funny sort of way that had struck her at the first, they were helpless, or too trusting. Well, something like that. Anyway, they needed her. She would not disappoint them. May would go free. No one would have to find out. Winnie would have to find out that May could not, but Winnie blocked the picture from her mind, the horror that would prove the secret. Instead, she turned her thoughts to Jessie. When she was 17, would she? If it was true, would she? And if she did, would she be sorry afterwards? Tuck had said, "It's something you don't find out how you feel until afterwards." But no, it wasn't true. She knew that. Now, here in her own bedroom, they were probably crazy after all, but she loved them anyway. They needed her. And thinking this, Winnie fell asleep. She woke with a jerk sometime later and sat up, alarmed. The clock was ticking steadily. The darkness was complete. Outside, the night seemed poised on tiptoe, waiting. holding its breath for the storm. Winnie stole out to the hall and frowned at the clock face in the window, and at last she could make it out, for the black Roman numerals were just barely visible against their white ground. The brass hands glowed faintly. As she peered at them, the long hand snapped forward one more notch with a loud click. She had not missed her moment. It was 5 minutes to midnight. Page 121, Chapter 24. Leaving the house was so easy that Winnie felt faintly shocked. She had half expected the instant she put a foot on the stairs they would leap from their beds and surround her with accusations, but no one stirred. And she was struck by the realization that if she chose, she could slip out night after night without their knowing. The thought made her feel more guilty than ever that she should once more take advantage of their trust. But tonight, this one last time, she had to. There was no other way. She opened the door and slipped out into the heavy August night. Leaving the cottage was like leaving something real and moving into dream. Her body felt weightless, and she seemed to float down the path to the gate. Jessie was there, waiting. Neither of them spoke. He took her hand, and they ran together, lightly down the road, past other sleeping cottages, into the dim and empty center of the village. The big glass windows here were lidded eyes that didn't care, that barely saw them, barely gave them back reflections. The blacksmith's shop, the mill, the church, the stores, so busy and alive in daylight, were hunched deserted now, dark piles and shapes without a purpose or a meaning. And then ahead, Winnie saw the jailhouse, its new wood still unpainted, lamplight spilling through a window at the front. And there, in the cleared yard behind it, like a great L upside down, was the gallows. The sky flashed white, but this time it wasn't heat lightning, for a few moments later a low mumble, still far away, announced at last the coming storm. A fresh breeze lifted Winnie's hair, and from somewhere in the village behind them a dog barked. Two shadows detached themselves from the gloom as Winnie and Jessie came up. Tuck pulled her to him and hugged her hard, and Miles squeezed her hand. No one said a word. Then the four of them crept to the back of the building. Here, too high for Winnie to see into, was a barred window through which, from the room in front, light glowed faintly. Winnie peered up at it, at the blackness of the bars, with the dim gold of the light between. Into her head came lines from an old poem. Stone walls do not a poison make, nor iron bars a cage. Over and over the lines repeated themselves in her head till they were altogether meaningless. Another roll of thunder sounded. The storm was moving nearer. Then Miles was standing on a box. He was pouring oil around the frame of the window. A swirl of wind brought the thick, rich smell of it down to the Winnie's nostrils. Tuck handed up a tool, and Miles began to pry at the nails securing the window frame. Miles knew carpentering. Miles could do the job. Winnie shivered and held tight to Jessie's hand. One nail was free, another. Tuck reached up to receive them as they came out one by one. A fourth nail screeched as it was pried up, and Miles poured on more oil. From the front of the jailhouse, the constable yawned noiselessly and began to whistle. The whistling came nearer. Miles dropped down. They heard the constable's footsteps coming up to May's cell. The barred door clanked. Then the footsteps receded. The whistling grew fainter, and inner doors shut, and the lamp glow disappeared. At once Miles was up again and prying at the nails. An eighth was out, a ninth, a 10th. Winnie counted carefully while behind her counting. Her mind sang, "Stone walls do not a poison make." Miles handed down the prying tool. He grasped the bars of the windows firmly, ready to pull, and stood poised. What is he waiting for? Thought Winnie. Why doesn't he? Then a flash of lightning, and soon after a crack of thunder. In the midst of the noise, Miles gave a mighty heave, but the window did not budge. The thunder ebbed. Winnie's heart sank. What if it was all impossible? What if the window would never come out? What if? She looked over her shoulder at the dark shape of the gallows and shuddered. Again a flash of lightning, and this time a crashing burst of noise from the swirling sky. Miles yanked. The window frame sprang free, and still grasping by the bars, he tumbled backwards off the box. The job was done. Two arms appeared in the hole left by the missing frame. May! Her head appeared. It was too dark to see her face. The window. What if it was too small for her to squeeze through? What if? But now her shoulders were out. She groaned softly. Another flash of lightning lit her face for an instant, and Winnie saw an expression there of deep concentration, tip of tongue protruding, brows furrowed. Now Tuck was on the box helping her, giving her his own shoulders to pull on. Miles and Jessie, close at his sides, arms upstretched, eager to receive her bulk. Her hips were free now. Look out! Here she came, her skirts tearing on the rough edges of the boards, arms flailing, and they were all in a heap on the ground. Another crash of thunder muffles Jessie's bursting, exultant laugh. May was free. Winnie clasped her trembling hands thankfully, and then the first drop of rain plopped precisely on the tip of her nose. The tucks untangled themselves and turned to her. One by one, as the rain began, they drew her to them and kissed her. One by one, she kissed them back. Was it rain on May's face? On Tuck's? Or was it tears? Jessie was last. He put his arms around her and hugged her tight and whispered the single word, "Remember." Then Miles was on the box again, lifting her. Her hands grasped the edges of the window. This time she waited with him. When the thunder came, it tore the sky apart with a roar, and as it came, she pulled herself through and dropped to the cot inside, unharmed. She looked up at the open square and saw the frame with Miles' hands holding it. The next obliging roll of thunder saw it wedge once more into place, and then, with Miles put back the nails, she waited. Rain came in sheets now, riding the wind, flung crosswise through the night. Lightning crackled, a brilliant, jagged streak. A thunder rattled the little building. The tension in the parched earth eased and vanished. Winnie felt it go. The muscles of her stomach loosened, and all at once she was exhausted. Still she waited. Would Miles put back the nails? At last, standing tiptoe on the cot, she grasped the bars of the window, pulling herself up till she could just see through. Rain blew into her face, but at the next flash of lightning, looking down, she saw that the yard was empty. And before the thunder followed, in a pause, while wind and rain held back for one brief moment, she thought she heard, fading in the distance, the tinkling little melody of the music box. The tucks, her darling tucks, were gone. Page 127, Chapter 25. The first week of August was long over, and now, though autumn was still some weeks away, there was a feeling that the year had begun its downward arc, that the wheel was turning again, slowly now, but soon to go faster, turning once more in its changeless sweep of change. Winnie, standing at the fence in front of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, could hear the new note in the voices of the birds. Whole clouds of them lifted chattering into the sky above the wood, and then settled only to lift again. Across the road, goldenrod was coming into bloom, and an early dying milkweed had opened its rough pod, exposing a host of downy-headed seeds. As she watched one of these detach itself into a sudden breeze and sailed sedately off, while others leaned from the pod as if to observe its temperature. Winnie dropped down cross-legged on the grass. 2 weeks has gone by since the night of the storm, the night of May Tuck's escape, and May had not been found. There's no trace of her at all, or of Tuck, or Miles, or Jessie. Winnie was profoundly grateful for that, but she was also profoundly tired. It had been a trying 2 weeks. For the 100th time, she reviewed it all. How the constable had come into the cell soon after she had settled herself on the cot. How he had let down a shutter over the window to keep out the rain. How, then, he had stood over her as she hunched under the blanket, her breath heavy, trying to look as large as possible. How finally he had gone away and not come back till morning. But she had not dared to sleep, for fear she would kick off the blanket and give herself away, give the Tucks away, unwittingly. So she had lain there, pulse-thudding, eyes wide open. She would never forget the rattle of the rain on the jailhouse roof, or the smell of wet wood, or the darkness that had saved them all, or how difficult it was not to cough. She had wanted to cough as soon as it occurred to her that she mustn't, and she passed a long hour trying to swallow away the tickle that perversely constricted her throat. And she would never forget the crash outside that made her heart race, that she could not investigate and did not understand till morning. When on the way home she saw that the gallows had blown over in the wind. But oh, it made her tremble still to remember the constable's face when he found her. She had heard first a bustling in the front of the jail and smelled fresh coffee and had sat up stiff with apprehension. Then the inner door opened, the door she now saw which separated the office from the pair of cells, and in the light that streamed before him, the constable appeared carrying a breakfast tray. He was whistling cheerfully. He came up to the barred door and her cell and looked in, and his whistling died on his lips, as if it had run down and needed to be wound up again. But this comical astonishment lasted for a moment only, and then his face flushed red with anger. Winnie had sat on the cot, eyes downcast, feeling very small and very like a criminal. In fact, he was soon shouting that if she were older, he'd have to keep her there, that it was a crime. What she had done, she was an accomplice. She had helped a murderer escape. She was, in fact, a criminal, but too young to be punished by the law. Worse luck, he told her, for she badly needed punishing. She was released then into the custody of her mother and father, and these new words, accomplice in custody,